Mention the zoo in Singapore, and most people will think about the Singapore Zoo at Mandai, sitting on 26 hectares of land and housing over 4,200 animals. The zoo opened its doors to the public in 1973. But did you know that it was not the first zoo to exist in Singapore? The history of wildlife parks here actually goes as far back as the early 19th century. From early to mid-1800, Sir Stamford Raffles, William Farquhar, and wealthy businessman Hu Ah-kay, better known as Whampoa, maintained menageries, or wild animals kept in captivity, such as elephants, big cats, tapirs, giraffes, and many more. Public zoos were not established in Singapore until 1875. That year, a zoo was set up in the Botanic Gardens, funded by the British colonial government. The zoo was closed in 1904 when funding from the government was withdrawn and it had to rely on private contributions to fund its operating costs. It was only 70 years later that another public zoo, the Singapore Zoological Gardens, was established. But in the meantime, many private zoos continued to attract visitors. One of these belonged to an animal trader, William Lawrence Soma Basapa. Located in Punggol, the zoo operated from 1928 to 1942 and had a collection of about 200 animals and 2,000 birds. Unfortunately, it was ordered to close before the Japanese invasion, and many of the animals were either killed or released into the wild, as Basapa was only given 24 hours to relocate them. In the early 1950s, Mayfield Kennels and Zoo on East Coast Road was opened by Herbert de Souza. There, visitors could buy animals like white mice, giant pythons, and even elephants. A few years later in 1957, Tong Seng Man opened the Singapore Miniature Zoo at Pasir Panjang. The zoo closed in the early 1960s after wildlife trade regulations were tightened, and he later became a consultant for the Singapore Zoo. In 1958, the Shaw brothers also wanted in on the action and applied to run a zoo in the Great World Amusement Park. But the City Council rejected their proposal because of safety concerns. The last private zoo was likely opened in Punggol by Chan Kim Swan in 1963. It later went bankrupt, and its birds and animals were auctioned off. The idea for the Singapore Zoo came up in 1968 when the Public Utilities Board started exploring ways to use water catchment areas for recreational purposes. But 3 months before the zoo was to open, a series of dramatic escapes made headline news. First, 2 sun bears squeezed their way out of their cages. Then, a young panther named Twiggy escaped and roamed free for almost 11 months until it was seen entering a monsoon drain near the Singapore Turf Club. Additional security measures were added. Still, more animals escaped. Despite a rocky start in the 70s, the Singapore Zoo has transformed to become the well-loved attraction that it is today. Since its opening, the zoo has launched many programs for its visitors and seen the rise of its beloved ambassador Aming. The zoo's popularity has inspired new attractions like the Night Safari and River Wonders. With its research and conservation efforts, the Singapore Zoo has become a place not just for recreation, but also for education.